All right. Good morning, everybody.
We live?
We're live.
Okay, excellent. Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the virtual edition of Hindsight, November 2020. It's been a crazy year, but you're in store for an amazing 2 days. So a big shout out to those of us that are on the West Coast and also joining us from across the ocean, because I know that's a very early day or maybe a very late night for you. So our names are Tiffany Ann Taylor, and I go by she. And this is my co-chair, Giovanni Terra Christie. They go by they. And we're broadcasting from the Lenape-Hoking section of New York, also known as Brooklyn. We are the co-chairs of the revived APA New York Metro Chapter Diversity Committee, also known as DIVCOM. We are a coalition of multiracial, multi-gender planning professionals actively working towards a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable planning profession. We are so excited to have you all here for the fourth annual Hindsight Conference. We wish we could be in person today, but despite the pandemic and all the crazy things happening in the world, we are still so grateful to be here with you all today, even if virtually. And so many of you have turned out. We have over 1,060 people registered this year, which is incredible. So in the tradition of opening and closing remarks, G and I are really going to split time throughout the day. So G typically gives opening remarks, and I'm going to give closing remarks at the end of tomorrow, which is day 2. So in a few minutes, or really a few seconds, I will leave the virtual stage. But first, please join G and I as she leads the Indigenous Land Acknowledgement.
Great. Thanks, Tiffany. All right. Good morning, everybody. So before we begin, we'd like to start with an Indigenous land acknowledgement, because though we're operating in this virtual platform today, we're each still existing in the context of place and history. So at this moment, I ask each of you to type into the auditorium chat box, which should be on your left side there, or the right side, the name of the Indigenous land that hosts you. So if you're not sure about this, you can visit native-land.ca and check out your geography. So go ahead, I ask you each to just go ahead and enter that into the chat box. And if our DivCom members, if you can please help to model that for everybody. So while we're doing that, I invite you all to just take a deep collective breath with me just to ground ourselves right now. So we can just do an inhale and just fill up your lungs and then slowly exhale it out. And just read through the many names that are coming up in the chat box. We acknowledge that many of us here today are settlers on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Indigenous peoples of the Americas. And we pay respects to their elders, past and present. We acknowledge that many of us are beneficiaries of the colonial state that has violently forced the relocation and displacement of Indigenous people from their lands, committed genocide of the people, culture, language, and way of living. Their descendants still live amongst us today, actively fighting for sovereignty and land back. And this acknowledgement demonstrates our commitment to dismantling the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism, and note that we can no longer be complicit in silence and inaction. So I ask each of you to join me in a moment of silence to reflect on the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brought us all here today, to honor the original stewards of this land, and to inquire on our role and responsibility as settlers and beneficiaries of this violence, and to center and support the movements of Indigenous people around us in the fight for sovereignty and the return of their ancestral homelands. Thanks, everyone. It's really good to be here with all of you today. Even though we're virtual, I'm speaking to a camera. I'm just still imagining a massive crowd of people in an auditorium as if we were in person, feeling that energy. And some of you might be new to Hindsight, so I wanted to start off by sharing a bit of what this conference is about and how it started. Hindsight is a conference on urban planning through an equity lens. The conference started 4 years ago when a group of us at the Diversity Committee were fed up with urban planning conferences around the nation. They were expensive, inaccessible, mostly white and male in speakers and attendees, and only had a few token sessions that touched equity or even race issues, despite all of the organizing work by planners of color over the decades. I think it spoke to how the planning profession across the nation has largely failed to acknowledge and address its racist roots and its role in social inequality today. So we decided to organize our own entire planning conference that would have the features that we wanted to see, where equity was embedded in every corner and crevice of the conference. It started as Tiffany's crazy idea, although I always say that maybe I was the crazy one to say, all right, let's do it. And we started with this idea of just maybe a one-time conference and we'd get 50 to 80 attendees. And now it's become this 4th annual conference that's sold out a week in advance every year. And we have over 1,060 people registered today, which I think is a huge testament to the demand to center equity in planning. Each year, the conference highlights a significant urban planning and equity-related milestone. So the first year, we acknowledged the 100th anniversary of Buchanan v. Worley, the Supreme Court case that invalidated racial zoning. The second year, we acknowledged the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. And then last year, our theme was Erasure, Remembrance, and Healing, honoring 3 significant events in Black and LGBTQ history. And we do this to not only shed light on the discriminatory history of planning and its role in shaping today's inequitable places, but also to highlight how planning is a means to achieve more inclusive, just, and equitable places. So this year is another special year. You know, we were really excited last year to have Hindsight 2020 to play with on branding, but that was, we didn't expect 2020 to be, 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic has amplified our nation's structural inequities. We've seen rising income inequality, worsening natural disasters, continued police brutality against Black lives, the passing of great leaders. There's been a lot of grief and anger and hopelessness, and it's been a lot on our health and well-being, especially for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And on top of that, it's been a stressful election year. I'm still recovering, but I will take a moment to say that I'm so proud and inspired by the incredible organizing work by Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color to fight voter suppression and turn people out. And I think this election has really shown us the power that communities of color have. And so now the real work can continue. So for this year's theme, it was really challenging to capture all of that, right? There's actually a lot of anniversaries in 2020. But when we started planning Hindsight in the spring, one that kind of stood out in irony is the 50 years since the creation of the US Environmental Protection Agency, whose mission is to protect human health and the environment, however effective. Urban planning had roots in public and environmental health. But in hindsight, it seems to have reduced its understanding of this interplay to active design or going green. But at the root of racial disparities and life outcomes that we see today is inequitable places and systems of white supremacy, which planning, design, policymaking have been complicit in perpetuating. But this also means we have the power and responsibility to dismantle it. So this year's conference, we're calling on planners, policymakers to centralize racial justice and take accountability for this racist past. We invite you to reflect on and take action towards a future where we prioritize Black and Brown existence, joy, creativity, and healing. We invite you to assert the future that we want, where Black and Indigenous people of color, people with disabilities, queer, trans, gender nonconforming individuals, and other historically marginalized groups are leading the road to recovery, and where our white allies are doing all that they can to work towards accountability and healing. We must build a future where Black, Indigenous people of color not just survive, but more importantly, thrive. We need to strengthen our connections to land and our ancestors, our historic and present day movements, and to one another. Let us take claim to our health and our future. And as usual with hindsight, everything that you see here today has equity intentionally built in. We're so grateful to be working together with Crux, a Black-owned production company, to run the tech for this year's virtual conference on this platform. So I wanted to give Lauren, Austin, Jose, and Blair a big round of virtual applause. The swag box y'all received includes postcards and buttons that are designed by our very own talented Gloria Lau, and includes some lavender balm, which were all made by local minority and women-owned businesses, including the company that helped us organize them and ship them to your individual addresses. We selected each of the 27 sessions and 9 digital exhibits today from a competitive pool of over 80 proposals to ensure that equity was centralized in every single one, that there's diversity in the speakers, a variety of session topics related to the theme, from transgender nonconforming inclusive housing to raising Black and Indigenous children to gender in the care economy, nightlife, and more. We also have a virtual marketplace that's featuring Black and Brown-owned businesses, as well as a reading list featuring social justice books that are relevant to urbanism. So be sure to check these out in your program and later in the exhibit. We have healing that's built into our opening remarks each day, including a healing and safe space hour at the end of today, and yes, a dance party after tomorrow's day of the conference featuring DJ Tara, who's also an urban planner, at the end of day 2. And we have a lineup of amazing speakers for our Keynote Fireside chat, all who are Black Indigenous women, and plus a graphic recorder to capture the conversation for us. I also wanted to note that this conference is all volunteer designed and organized by the passion and sweat of our DivCom members. We all have full-time jobs, other professional familial commitments, some of us have kids, and we're also all struggling with our own grieving and life transitions. But here we are today. And every year, I'm just more and more grateful for this community of creative, inspiring, passionate, overachieving, humble, and thoughtful individuals. And what we created over these years continues to remind me that we can really truly achieve anything if we collectively put our hearts and souls into it. So extending a big thank you to my fellow organizers, to Crux for helping us today, as well as to our sponsors, speakers, and attendees that made today and tomorrow possible. So now I want to introduce our American Planning Association New York Metro Chapter President, Max Sokol, who has been so supportive of DivCom over these years, to give some additional remarks. All right.
Good morning. Would you mind just giving me a thumbs up if you're able to hear me, or a note in the chat? Wonderful. Thank you so much, G and Tiffany and the entire DivCom team. Let me begin this morning by thanking all of our speakers, session organizers, sponsors, chapter leadership, and above all, to our exceptional diversity committee. At last year's Hindsight, I spoke about the generous award bestowed upon DivCom by the APA National Chapter President's Council. And I'm delighted that this year, the Chapter President's Council has offered a conference registration to the president or designee from all of the 47 chapters around the country. Beyond the financial support for Hindsight, this is a powerful statement about the ways in which DivCom is viewed as a leader, not only by me and those within the 14 counties that comprise our chapter, but also throughout the entire nation. When sharing the announcement with the chapter presidents, APA's leadership director noted that our hope is that someone from your chapter leadership will attend and think about ways to bring the spirit and energy of Hindsight to your chapter. There's great work to highlight among chapters across the country in the EDI space, including in Texas, Illinois, and Oregon, just to name a few. And I'm very proud that we get to celebrate our chapter's DivCom through the annual tradition of Hindsight. During our chapter conference last month, in her first remarks as president-elect, Tiffany Ann Taylor stressed the importance of, quote, showing up, which you all have undoubtedly done today, while also indicating that you need to do more. Specifically, Tiffany encouraged everyone to, quote, question the status quo, and Hindsight offers an unparalleled opportunity to do just that. With that in mind, I suggest that everyone push themselves over the next 2 days to embrace the purpose of this unique conference and expand your horizons. Rather than attending Hindsight as a passive observer, strive to be an active participant in some uncomfortable but vital discussions, while above all, ensuring that you proactively create space for those who are traditionally underrepresented. In that vein, it's important to underscore that during my time as chapter president, I have prioritized serving as a vocal champion of DivCom's phenomenal work, with a noteworthy caveat. As a white male, I need to acknowledge my privilege. This is the culmination of my 2 terms and 4 years overall as chapter president, and I could not be prouder of the evolution of our chapter. Just as the spirit of Hindsight is to approach this conference and all planning work through an equity lens, I increasingly feel that our chapter is truly anchored by the DivCom community. We have strong representation from DivCom among the incoming executive committee, which will be led by our extraordinary president-elect, Tiffany Ann Taylor. Without further ado, I want to thank you for showing your support for the invaluable work of our award-winning and nationally recognized diversity committee. I hope you take away from the conference as much as the Hindsight team put into it, and then pay it forward by promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion in all that you do. Thank you so much.
Let me unmute here. All right. Thanks so much, Max, for those words. Really excited to now transition us to our annual Keynote Fireside Chat. So I'm going to introduce our wonderful moderator, Emily de los Santos. Right here, you can see. Emily is a first-generation Afro-Latina urban planner and DivCom member with a passion for equitable housing and community development. She is an assistant project manager at the NHP Foundation, which is a nonprofit real estate group, where she supports the financing, development, and preservation of multifamily housing. Emily is focused on innovative approaches that leverage resources to create visible, positive, and vibrant outcomes for underserved communities. And she's also the incoming New York City section representative for the APA New York Metro chapter. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Emily, who will lead our Keynote Fireside Chat, and I'll see you all after.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. I will follow Max. Can everyone give me a thumbs up if they can hear me? Awesome. Great. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us at our 4th annual Hindsight Conference. And thank you for joining us during our virtual fireside chat, which is a little different than previously. And so along the same lines as what G has mentioned, we know the setting is not the same as it has been previously, but we truly appreciate you being with us and are extremely excited to have this virtual keynote discussion. And while we're not physically sharing the same space, we feel connected to everyone who is present today. During this year's Keynote Fireside Chat, we will explore the theme of our health and our future in urban planning and public policy and public health. As noted by G, this year we are honoring the 50th year of the EPA, which was established to protect human health and our environment. We have seen how the global pandemic has magnified the racist and injustice systems that are in place currently. During this discussion, we want to focus on understanding the impact these injustices have on our communities from different perspectives and identify the ways in which we as a collective can work towards dismantling them. I would love to just discuss with you some of the goals that we have for this discussion. One of them being to bring an intergenerational group together that uses storytelling to share respective lived experiences and promoting social justice and acknowledges connections between the past, present, and future. We also want to explore different innovative practices that can influence the reimagination of institutions and systems that truly meet the needs of historically marginalized groups and promote social justice. We also want to encourage and challenge planners, policymakers to apply a global and anti-racist decolonizing lens in their work to address the profession's racially disproportionate environment and health impacts. Lastly, we hope to derive strength and healing from those that come before us to take action to better future generations. I am extremely honored and am very excited to introduce you all to all of our amazing keynote speakers that are joining us this morning. These two women are warriors and passionate advocates who fight for social justice and racial justice every day. Not only do they fight to end the injustices ingrained in our society, but they also acknowledge and explore healing practices. Please welcome me in acknowledging our speakers. Great. Okay. We have Kara Page. Kara, if you'd love to wave a little bit, that'd be great. Hi. Kara is a Black queer feminist, a cultural memory worker, a curator who has been a racial, gender, and economic justice organizer for 30 plus years. She is the former ED of the Audre Lorde Project, one of the architects of healing justice, and founding organizer and curator of Changing Frequencies, an archival and cultural memory project seeking to transform generational trauma from the medical industrial complex. We have Maya, if you can wave as well, that'd be great. Awesome. Maya Chapana is a youth council member for Eat for Earth Gardens, an organization that inspires and trains diverse youth to be effective leaders in the environment, climate, and social justice movements. Maya is passionate about water conservation and protection and regularly speaks and writes about decolonizing indigenous healing wisdom, ecology, and sovereignty. She is pursuing her master's degree at the University of New Mexico and is a graduate of Eugene Lang College at the New School with a degree in cultural and media studies. I would also love to introduce you to Tiari Jung. Tiari, can you wave? Hi. Tiari Jung Day is a graphic recorder who will be creating a visual representation of the Keynote Fireside discussion. Tiari, a Muhu queer person and born and raised in the Kletane territory. Please correct me if I said that incorrectly. The land that cares for them is the ancestral homelands of the Musqueam, Slavuted, and Squamish people. Please join me in welcoming all of them today. And one final note, we actually had one more panelist, Tara Hauska, a tribal attorney and climate activist from Kuchuching First Nation. Unfortunately, she is not able to join us this morning due to an emergency, but we will keep her in our thoughts and prayers, and we're sending her much love. And I would love to inform and note to our speakers to unmute themselves if they can. Great. So for the first part of our conversation, we really want to get to know both of our speakers. For this conversation, we want to highlight and focus on the sharing of intergenerational voices to thread connections between the past, the present, and the future, to center environmental justice in the fight against systematic racism. We're very interested in learning about the different perspectives that each of our speakers has, and also learning about the experiences because they each have a unique angle. So the first question is, can you share with us the work you do and tell us a bit about what drives your passion in what you do around health and environmental justice? And how do you find your calling for this work? I would love for Kara to go first.
Great, thank you. I'm honored, first I want to say I'm honored to be here with all of you, especially with the co-panelist Maya. It's an honor to meet you and learn more about your work, yes. And Emily, Giovanna, Tiffany, and Tiare, and sending light to Tara. I deeply appreciate this invitation to the Hindsight Conference at this critical moment for our Earth, for our political moment in this country and for the fight against fascism in this world. And I want to give a shout out to the Crux team and the interpreters for amplifying us from behind the scenes and in front. I come to you by way of my ancestors and community of Black, Seminole, and European descent from the swamplands of Florida, the mountains of Georgia and North Carolina, and the riverbanks of Jersey and Pennsylvania. I am here today on Lenape, Muncie Lenape land in Brooklyn, New York. My work is deeply rooted in the belief that we can transform generational, individual, and collective trauma by confronting the tremendous grief and sacrifice of our people that have survived colonization, attempted genocide, forced sterilization, forced migration, and displacement from our land, cultures, and traditions. I come to you as a Black feminist and Black queer organizer, cultural memory worker, and futurist, doing organizing that intersects at the places of healing, survival, and reclamation of earth, body, light work, and transformation. I'm building movement work that I feel strongly builds us towards the future in valuing our collective survival despite global fascism and despite things like a global pandemic. And as an architect of healing justice, which is a political framework that seeks to intervene on generational trauma from systemic oppression by building strategies, infrastructure, and traditions on how we hold our spiritual, cultural, environmental, psychic, physical, and emotional well-being in our movements and in our communities and in the institutions that we're a part of. As a survivor of state and family violence, I work at the intersections of place and memory and do multimedia installations that pay homage to Black, Indigenous, migrant, and disabled communities, queer and trans, in believing that if we look at this history and contemporary practices of testing, experimentation, and exploitation in the medical industry as an extension of state control and violence, we can begin to confront and transform the grief and trauma from these practices and abuses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kara, for that. Maya, I will repeat the question for you in case it may have been forgotten. But can you please share with us the work you do and tell us a bit about what drives your passion and what you do around health and environmental justice? How did you find your calling for this work?
Yeah, Imanaya, I just want to introduce myself. Nyokak kani Maya Chipana Nyokak Nyokak kani Quechua Wadmi, and my name is Maya, and thank you for repeating the question, and thank you to the other speakers that have gone before me up until this point, and for the land acknowledgement. So the work that I've been involved with the past several years, I guess the past couple of years, I would say, for me, they really are passion projects, passion work, and I think that I feel that for me it's a calling because I'm an aunt and I'm a big sister too, and for me, like a lot of the work that that I'm involved with has to do with leaving Mother Earth in better hands than we arrived in, and I think also I can speak for perhaps people in my generation too. During this time growing up, you know, it's been so many changes, technological changes, environmental, ecological changes, and I really do believe that my generation, we have like all of these teachings from the older generations too. Like I remember things that my grandparents would tell me and continue to tell me about how things were, about how things should be done, about how traditions should be carried. And for me, I really do just want to be able to tell the younger generations, like my nieces and my nephews, and even potentially, you know, like my own kids one day or my own grandkids one day, about how traditions are, and then like also maintain like my indigenous language. So like learning my indigenous language has been really important to me. I'm also really involved with revitalization of the Quechua language, because my dad's a Quechua teacher and he's teaching me more of the Quechua language. So I think that has to do also with environmental degradation. So I think that like when we like preserve indigenous languages, we're also at the same time preserving Mother Earth's health. I think they're like simultaneously together. We do it. So for me, it's all, essentially it's all for like the next generations, because I know that it's provided a lot of beauty and clarity and harmony and peace in my life. And I don't want to lose that, like, I don't want like, I want to like carry on my grandparents' prayers, forever. So that's why it's important for me. I don't even see it as an option. Like I just pray every day, about that.
Thank you both. Thank you both for sharing those both insightful experiences. I think, as we were thinking through the different individuals that we wanted to connect with and to have at this as part of our Keynote Fireside conversation, we really wanted to highlight different experiences and different and storytelling narratives, so that those who are joining us today are able to reflect on their own experiences and find some similarities or some connection with what both of you have explained and with what both of you have experienced. Moving on to the next piece, we will really be interested in learning from both of you about the work that you do in practicality. There are many of us present today and not present today who are actively working to dismantle systemic racism and ableism. That is not the route to our inequitable health outcomes. We are seeing more planners and organizations adopting an explicit anti-racism and anti-oppression lens. There are people working from the planning, policy, and even the corporate field on the ground with community organizing and activism, with people in the academic world. There are different approaches to the work from these various spaces. At the same time, though, we are also fighting against many policies and movements that are in direct opposition to our goals of racial justice and equity. And we have yet to see comprehensive, impactful, or explicit direct anti-racism measures to address the persistent health inequalities. And so we're very interested in learning more from your work and from your experience and your reflections on what we need to learn from the past and present to apply to the future. So our question is, what innovative tools or practices are you utilizing to aid your work to dismantle racism and oppression, or to reimagine our institutions and systems? I would love for Kara to answer her first question. I believe, Carrie, that you are muted.
Oops, sorry,
No problem.
forgot that first step. Okay. I just want to say, yes, about 15 years ago, I was organizing in the South. I returned home, I like to say, one of my political cultural homes. I am the great-granddaughter of African-American migrant sharecroppers and Black Seminole freedom fighters. And I had the honor of learning again how to organize. And for myself as a Black queer healer at the time, I'm very deeply rooted in the reproductive justice, healing justice, transformative justice, and prison abolitionist movement. And with the heightened fascism and anti-Black racism and xenophobia that we were experiencing in the Southeast in particular, as an extension of slavery and exploitation in the global South and capitalism, In the early 2000s, I started to ask the question, where are we holding space for grief and trauma after having many decades of being pummeled by physical hate violence, that's racialized, and gender violence, also homophobic and transphobic violence, so on and so forth. How do we hold the loss of organizers, freedom fighters, community members to state communal violence? And also, how do we hold each other in movements when we're losing campaigns or losing fights on all fronts of struggle, be that in the environmental justice movement, labor justice, health justice, so on and so forth, and started to ask, how do we, I started to ask movement organizers across movements, how can we not be siloed in how we are confronting racism, grief and trauma from racism? How can we understand trauma on a cellular level through the studies of Indigenous scholars like Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, who's been really leading on the field of what it means to hold intergenerational trauma on a cellular level from the colonization of Indigenous people, and Dr. Joy DeGruyere's work on understanding the relationship to post-traumatic slave syndrome, and Mindy Fullilove, Dr. Mindy Fullilove, African-American scholar who also looks at displacement of Black communities and people of color communities during redlining in the 50s and 60s and 70s in this country. So, but I wanted to bring that into movement, right? Because it felt very academic to talk about trauma, or it was inside of a very psychoanalytical school of thought that's, I think, steeped in racism, ageism, homophobia. This idea of healthy and healthcare has been deeply defined by a racist colonizer agenda that still purports healthy as being one body. And that body is white, cis, male, straight, older, and usually wealthy and usually Christian. So, and this idea of healthy being defined by purity, by desire, by sin, or even looking at the Bible, it's sort of like, this is, to be healthy is to be the pure Christian, white, able-bodied male ideal. So anything outside of that is going to be seen as less than human, or is going to be seen as dirty and unhealthy, right? And so inside of that, in that paradigm, we were looking at, in the early 2000s, also a displacement, a continued displacement of our Black, Indigenous, and people of color traditions of healing. And I was starting to track the criminalization of healers, be they birth workers, be they Indigenous practices to the US South. Like, how do we make sure that our traditions and our practitioners and healers are not criminalized or displaced for their political, cultural healing work? And if movements aren't understanding that level of criminalization is happening, then how will we even honor that part of liberation work is to also honor how we have healed from slavery, how we have healed from colonization. So just to go back to that, for me, innovative tools and practice became, how will we reclaim our relationship to earth, energy, body, land-based practices, particular in the South, and particular in the global South? And how will we honor the lineage and traditions of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities that are being criminalized for their practices? And started a political framework called Healing Justice, which was really rooted in an abolitionist, anti-capitalist, Black and global South feminist frame that asked the question, how will we value all bodies, all genders, all abilities, and push back against this concept of who is healthy, who deserves to survive, and who deserves to be able to have access to our collective care and well-being strategies, traditions, and practices. I'll stop there.
We can keep going forever. I'm also just trying to take a little bit of notes, even though I'm moderating, because what both of you are saying is just so inspirational. And I know this is being recorded, but I'm just like, oh my God. But thank you so much. I want to ask the same question of you, Maya. You know, what innovative tools or or practices are you utilizing in your work to dismantle systemic racism and oppression, or to reimagine the institutions and systems? And specifically, we know you were working with the youth, and you really highlighted that effort in bringing forward the knowledge of your older generation and passing that on to the youth. And so, how are you able to work with, and what kinds of ways are you working with the youth on the work that you're doing?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Honestly, the first one that came into my mind is herbal and plant medicine. I think that like when we pray with and when we ingest like medicines that come from the earth, I can say that in all of these experiences, it's always been the same thing where I feel like my kinships, whether that's like a human being, regardless of age, regardless of color, regardless of religion, or other kinship like, nature as well, which I was touching upon in the first question about ecological degradation and trying to prevent that. But in terms of racial equality and even also gender and non-binary and being respectful of that as well, I think that plant medicine is a great tool for people to really tune in and confront their own selves, their own insecurities, and I think that's how we act healthier and more caring to one another, I would say. And then that's just like the first one that came into my mind, because I think that really shows is not in a hippie sort of way where it's like, oh, all is love, but like in a really real way where it's like we're actually all just living in this because of our ancestors, and not only are we here by accident, but like we are our ancestors' prayers. And I think when I think about myself as an Indigenous woman, I also think that Black people are also Indigenous. So it's like when I talk about Indigenous liberation, or when I'm envisioning what Indigenous liberation thinks of, that's no way separate to Black liberation, because Black people are Indigenous as well. So I think that's like, I don't know what I think it's referred to as like red and Black power, like red and Black unity, because sometimes we call ourselves red, Native peoples. So, and then I think other tools definitely are education, getting an education, reading, learning history. I think learning history is a great one. I'm in school right now for American history, so I'm like learning about a lot of history, and it's helping me a lot understand how we got to the place that we are today, politically speaking, and also socially.
Thank you. I think you both have hit on such great points, and I'm pretty sure that our audience, our attendees, are taking in all this great information and knowledge. We want to follow up with a question based on the experiences that you've had. What lessons have you learned from the past experiences or events or leaders that have informed your work? Maya, you really did know a little bit about this earlier in your first response, and your earlier response to how your grandparents and those who have come before you really have inspired you in the work that you've done. But can you speak a little bit more about what lessons that you've learned from those experiences, from specific information or specific instances that they have discussed with you, or other movements and or other events that really have informed your work?
Yeah, I think that, that's another great question. I think, listening to my grandparents, one of the things that really for me has been present and coming, the messages that I'm receiving from them, is about how family is everything, and not just blood family, but like your community. So like you want to take care of like your community and have like be like a good leader, like be like a good human being, being a good leader for yourself, to yourself. Don't follow the crowd. Be comfortable in your uniqueness and be okay in solitude. I think also the pandemic has shown us a lot about solitude, to say the least, and to be comfortable with your solitude. And I think that's one of the things that I've also been doing lately, is like being my own best friend. And I think I've received like a lot of healing in that. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because I think that's a good lesson for all of us. I mean, it's helped me, so I would recommend it to someone else because it's been helping me, of being comfortable in my own skin, learning, praying by myself sometimes, just going out to whatever river, whatever body of water is close to you and just praying to yourself. I think that's really good, because a lot of times when we have conflicts, I think it's because just in my personal experiences, like we feel unhappy with their lives or insecure or like judged, you know. But when we're alone and when we're really comfortable, you're kind of like become like water in a way, and you just like flow. So I think that's like something that my elders have like helped me realize, is that like when you're alone, you're never alone. Like you're always with spirit. You're always like taken care of, grounded, because of your ancestors, and ancestors regardless of where you're from. Like everyone has ancestors, you know, it doesn't matter where you're from. And I think that's been helping me out a lot. Like I said, the pandemic's definitely made us be alone, but even afterwards, I think that that's something that I always want to carry on, is like being a solid human being for myself, to myself. And then like that also, in a way, it's helped me like communicate better to people, because I'm like more careful of what I'm like trying to express, because it's like you're comfortable with the sound of silence, so you don't have to like talk just to talk. And it kind of like makes your relationships, and I repeat, like kinship, when I say kinship or relationships, I don't mean just with other humans, though that is extremely important because we live in a society with two-legged, but I mean like also with everyone, like help me communicate better to all my relations. And then that's one thing. And then I don't want to take up too much time, but I can probably say more. But like
No problem.
Like that's it for now.
Great. I would love to ask the same question of you as well, Carol. You know, how do you weave in the many different lessons learned across the different movements that you've worked in, you know, while being in the field of organizing for more than 2 decades, and really being able to provide a very diverse perspective to the work, because of the experiences, because of what you've seen really take place in the last 2 decades and how things have changed?
Thank you. I appreciate, Maya, what you were saying about kinship in the broad sense, and also the political education piece. I forgot to say, in terms of tools, yeah, that's what I'm based in, is like, how do we build movement or organizing tools that are rooted in knowing our past, our present, and being able to imagine our futures? And being a very young 50-year-old, I've been organizing for over actually 3 decades. And what has been most important is that my political education is coming from my elders, is coming from youth, is coming from incarcerated and formerly incarcerated and detained people. Like that, the lessons learned aren't just inside the halls of academia, but like out in the street, you know. And I've spent a lot of time gathering stories and doing listening campaigns like the Zapatistas, and understanding what is our relationship to this work. I've been tracking the stories of the American Indigenous movement, the AIM, Black Liberation Movement, to your point, Maya, as for myself as a Black Seminole, who comes from that ancestry, but was cut off because of state and family violence, right, and displacement between Black and Indigenous. There's so many stories I'm trying to gather now, and my family, my siblings, we're trying to do the memory work. That's what I call political storytelling memory work. That if we are guided by the stories of our ancestors and the communities that we touch and connect to, there is so much more truth and education and learning that we need to do with each other. to work across these ideas of false borders or false silos of like, oh, I'm asking the question, how does my story inform your story? How is my memory shaped by your memory? Because it's part of the colonizer project for us not to remember, right? What we have come from, how we have resisted, how we heal, what do we believe in our traditions that can take us into the way beyond future. Yes, I love that.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's beautiful. Beautiful.
We wanted to give a little bit of highlight to Tiare's great work. But Carol, please keep speaking. I know we can easily get distracted by this great work.
I was like, let's take a culture creative moment. So what I want to offer, and I also want to talk a little bit about birth workers. I want to talk about, when we talked about tools or lessons learned, I didn't mention what are the models of care and safety that we have used for our survival as Indigenous, Black, POC, migrant, queer and trans, disabled, poor, working class folks. Like, what have we used? And I often, by way of many lessons learned from elder and new, emergent, young birth workers who are creating space and place, who are going beyond the definition of borders, literally, to hold on to traditions like birthing at home. Here we are at an urban planning conference. Let's understand the institutional displacement of birthing as it has been a tradition, a plant, cultural, physical, medicinal tradition of Black and Indigenous survival, but it got built into an industry. But those practices were stolen to build that birthing industry from Black and Indigenous people, in particular in the global South. And so I've learned from birth workers, the traditions of birth workers that have held during slavery, before slavery, before colonization, held birth and life, including two-spirit traditions that held birth and life. And how do we imagine or reimagine wellness or care or even safety that pulls from this idea of how will I hold your safety as integral to my safety? How will I hold your well-being as integral to my well-being? How will I hold your birth, your life, your death as integral to my birth, my life, my death, of my kinship, right? To pull from your language on kinship, Maya, which I love. So that being said, we have shaped, some of the tools I've used are mobile wellness teams that draw on different traditions of care and healing, and we move information with mobilizations like Black Lives Matter, like against anti-Black racism, against xenophobia, against global fascism, like moving information in huge marches and rallies with teams of healers, nurses, health practitioners that ask the question, how will we take care of our people while we're being pummeled by police violence or counter demonstrators? Like understanding and honoring that care and safety are part of the political apparatus of how we are building movement in this country and in the world. And then reflection and creation, that these are practices. Like I said, this is memory work for me because I am drawing on my ancestral memory, even though it's been tried to be stolen or taken from me, and I'm laying down memory work that I hope people will take that memory forward in the next generation. So with that, I know I just added to my last answer, is in terms of my lessons learned, I mean, I've been transpired by working in many movements, deeply humbled by Southern movements that I feel move like we need each other. In the words of Ella Baker, that we must move together in the service of the work, that no one is expendable and everyone is invaluable for all of our movements. I am transpired constantly on the global South fight against fascism, against a global disease-based economy that does not value our communities during COVID. The fight for PPEs or just quality access to care it's part of something, but it doesn't even speak to the other side of it. Of many of us have been out here in movements fighting for an economy that values, that fights against the closure of rural hospitals. Like, yes, there's COVID, but it's 10 years before that set us up for the failure of COVID, because the state, the government did not value keeping our hospitals open, keeping our traditions accessible, not criminalizing our practitioners for being able to do home births. It's like that kind of infrastructure, that working across movements, labor justice, economic justice, environmental justice, health justice, that we are at this moment of transpiring. And I have learned so much about, if we're not talking to each other outside of silos, then how will we imagine what it is we could even build and create together, and in cases pull from what we've done that has allowed us to survive this far. So I want to say I've learned in the weaving of movement intergenerationally, across different fights of struggle, that if we're not listening to each other on what is important for our collective survival and well-being and to build power, what a loss. Because COVID, this global pandemic, shows us all the intersections of all the movements we've all been a part of. It was about Earth. It was about the economy. It is about abolition. It is about racial capitalism. If we are not seeing this as this moment to reclaim, reacclimate, and say, we need to do this differently, so we can more than survive, so we can dream and we can imagine what we want to build together.
Can we just talk all day? Because this is amazing. I am so moved by what you both are saying, and definitely believe that this is a conversation that can go on forever. But all of the points that you have noted are so important. Kinship, embracing community, embracing culture, embracing historical knowledge, historical culture, and really, Kara, you noted on this towards the end of your response. This is a moment to transpire, to reclaim, and to come together and work collectively on a better future, on making sure that those who come behind us are in a better suited society to survive. And with that, I think it goes well into our third part of our conversation here. And it's really about advice to the audience. And I think most of you have hit that already in different ways. We are, as you noted, in a heightened public health and political and economic moment in history that has led not only our current society to react, but also has ignited many to challenge the policies that have been in place for centuries. I wanted to also just acknowledge that over the weekend we learned we have a new elected president and vice president, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We believe that the message they share with us is that to focus on hope and focus on hope towards a better future, right? And I think it aligns well with our theme for our conference today, our health and our future. With that said, though, I think everyone present today acknowledges that this newly elected administration is not going to solve all the problems that we have. That is not going to happen. It's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen in 4 years. It's not going to happen. But I think we have to acknowledge, though, that there is hope, there is inspiration for those who are working and for those who we may inspire to come with us and work together on fighting injustices, on fighting the ingrained racist systems that are in place right now, and are breaking down the walls that we have put in place to marginalize the groups of people. So with that said, we want to acknowledge that there are many, many obstacles today, and there's setbacks in fighting for justice and equity. But there is something that sparks us aflame, whether that be something personal, something internal, something that you see visually, but there's something that keeps us going. And so for our final question to you both, for spending your beautiful morning with us today, we want to ask you, what gets you up every day and keeps your hope alive? How do you continue fighting amidst the setbacks and or the challenges, and or the the losses in some cases, right? How do you continue moving forward in moments where you may not feel successful, you may feel defeated? Maya, would you love to answer first?
Yeah, I'm gonna say it again because I keep on saying that, but I just have to give recognition where it's due. An amazing question because it really has me thinking, and it's just an amazing question. But for sure, I would say creator, creatress, Mother Earth, waking up and just having. I always have like a glass of water or something next to me. I was just telling my older sister that. Yesterday I was telling her, I love my bed, like the head of my bed, like for the past, I don't know what years, I've always kept my head of the bed like behind the window if there is one in a room, because I love just waking up and seeing like light, the first white light. It's like how I was taught, it's like the first color you see in the morning is white, and then before I go to bed sometimes I'll see the moon, and that helps me. So yeah, so definitely prayer just keeps me going, keeps me strong. Water, just drink a tall glass of water before any coffee or anything or any tea. And then, aside from that, I think I would definitely say that is the first and foremost. But I would say definitely aside from that, I think of all of the people that I've come across, including my own Indigenous brothers and sisters in my homelands, who every day wake up, they work the fields, they go to work, they take their kids to school. Definitely, I would say the matriarchs that I've met, some of them in my own family, who don't give up, and I think that that's always inspiring to me, that they keep going. How my mom too. My mom always woke up to keep food in the fridge for us. She was a single mom. My dad left when I was like very young. So I think that's always kept me going. And then I think like, for example, that last question, that's something I didn't mention, but I think I'll bring it up here. Not take advantage, but like incorporate it in this question too, where I see like movements like an inspiring movement, right? But it also keeps me more so in recent mornings going, is like movimientos like MAS, the Movimiento al Socialismo, which in Bolivia, they also won the elections like not even 3 weeks ago. And when I see the Bolivian people and how organized they are and how passionate and dedicated they are, and not because of anything else, more than liberation, and more than freedom. And I think that that's like when I see like movements like that succeed, and I'm using succeed in a way of like, okay, they got the elections, they got their dictatorship, because there was how do you say it in English? Golpe in Spanish, a coup in November. So when I see like movements like that, I wake up and I'm like, how am I not gonna like just go to school, like make this bread? No, go to work. Like when I see like people like, and something that hits so close to home, because it's like my father's Bolivian, so the Bolivian socialist movement, the Bolivian indigenous movement for me is ultra inspiring, because I see myself in those people, because when I look at them, I see someone who's half Bolivian, who's Quechua. So I think people like that, movements like that, like I said, matriarchs, and I can go on, but I won't. But definitely that water, people, indigenous peoples, the land never gives up on us. So that's what keeps me going. But yes, thank you for asking such a great question.
Thank you so much. We are running up a little bit close on time, and we would love to have a question from the audience. So not to make your response shorter, Kara, but if you in a few words can describe to us, what keeps you, what gets you up every day, what keeps your hope alive, would be great for us. And then we would also get a question from the audience.
Movements, just like what Maya just spoke to, believing in people's transformation, believing in our transformation and liberation, and that we can actually build power that is deeply rooted in our connection to land, to body, to spirit, that allows us to thrive. And I would be remiss to say that in this space of hindsight, in a conference around space, right? Space and time, liminal space, the possibilities of how will we change space. I want to see urban planners. I believe that there is possibility, no matter where we are in our particular studies or paradigms, that we can all debunk myths of urban planning for safety. We can all debunk myths of what it means to decolonize the budget, what it means to decolonize space. So I do have strong belief in what is possible if we get outside of ourselves and mix it up, shake it up on the paradigms of what we believe is to be transformative, to build power and change.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are now going to ask our amazing group. I will acknowledge that while we get this question from the audience, Maya, you had noted these questions are great. Under the leadership of G, and myself and a couple of other members have been working very diligently through the last couple of months, not only in reaching out to people to be our keynote speakers, but to think intentionally about the questions that we asked today and about the conversation that we are having today, that we are currently having, and how this conversation is going to kick off, a great conference for the rest of this day and tomorrow. And then we hope that if you are able to join us, you definitely take part in that. We'll transition over to Happen when we do that, but I wanted to just acknowledge that many of us have come together to really be intentional about wanting to speak with you and learning from you. So the question that we've received here is, can you please share your personal collective desires and visions for a liberated futures? Feel free to share at any of the various levels of internal, interpersonal, institutional, ideological, and/or systemic. I believe we may be able to put the question up on the screen so that you guys both have that. So really, what does our healed and liberated future look like for you?
I mean, I'm going to jump in and just take poetic license. I think we've been both talking about it. And to the big questions that you've been asking, we've been weaving some of that, but I'd say interdependence, love, connection, protection for the survival of our people, and imagining safety and care that goes beyond just responding to what is painful or what isn't working, but actually to build safety and care is inextricable to liberation. That is, like, let's talk about it. What does that mean? And I would say that starts with let's confront and heal and grieve from generational trauma and how that shows up in the collective bodies. But let's interdependence, safety, care, love, connection.
Thank you. Oh, Maya, I think you are muted.
Oh,
no problem.
Sorry. I thought I unmuted it. My finger, I thought I pressed it. I agree. I think also more public, talking about urban planning and, how these spaces can also reflect and even help us heal too, because it is safe. I mean, safe spaces, like what is that even? It can be physical. It starts in that, maybe even. But I would think more public plazas, more public places for families, and I think families belong together. So I think like healed, liberated future, I see more families together, multi-generational families, and to be able to go outside to rivers, to have like really like light, like energetically light spaces for families and for people of all ages to enjoy. To feel not like the city is consuming your spirit, but more so like your spirit is like at peace in whatever space you're in. And then also maybe just because I'm reading Angela Davis right now, but I would also say a future with abolition movements, like abolishing prisons. Like I would say reimagining prisons, not just prison reform, but like I said, I'm reading this Angela Davis book, so maybe that's why I'm like, but also like whole different way of education. Like, not abolishing schools, but just like a whole different way of how we see schools or how we construct schools, I would say for sure. And a whole different way of how we imagine and see police states. That's what a liberated future looks like, for real. Something like that.
Well, thank you both Truly, thank you so much. We are so deeply appreciative of you taking this morning with us. This beautiful grand rising that we have, whether you are on the East, West, or in some other location of the world, we appreciate you all taking the time to be with us. Thank you to both, truly, Kara and Maya, for all of the great, insightful things that you have noted and that you have stated. We are about to give a little bit of time before we wrap up to Tiare and what they've captured. And we would love to, not only embrace the beautiful words and narratives that you have demonstrated, that you have shared with us today, but also see how it has translated onto this beautiful visual that we're now looking at. So I believe, Tiare, you just have to unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Hello. I want to say thank you so much. What an exciting, I've got shivers listening to you, Kara and Maya. And also, I also want to send my heart out to Tara, in the practice of honoring those that can't be here with us today, and just send love to whatever it is that she needs to tend to, and say thank you to her work and her spirit that is, elsewhere doing what she needs in the world, but contributing to the values and things we're talking about today. And as you can see, that was such a rich depth weaving of storytelling, and the image is emerging. I wanted to start with just drawing our panelists here and acknowledging them. And then here we've got my imagined renderings of some grandparents or ancestors. I hope that, I don't know what your grandparents look like, so we'll just go with that theoretically. And then I also wanted to weave in some plant life and like other living beings as part of that ancestry as well. And I also wanted to anchor this statement that Kara shared right at the beginning around the importance of like making these statements of like what we can do, and like we can transform trauma by confronting collective grief. So as I'm thinking of weaving this story, I'm thinking of like, well, what is needed to transform? What truth telling? And how can I weave in that story? So I just wanted to anchor some spots here to draw some, Maya mentioned that she's also an aunt, and so some children here. And then I wanted to draw a sort of triangle here and speak to this image of this like white man, the one healthy body. And I also wanted that to be a small portion of the poster, so that I can really give space to the like strength and the like speaking to the ancestral memory and the things that come before, and how I think about, I was in a space with a lot of Indigenous elders who were speaking to how colonization has only been within the hundreds of years. And, and of course there's specific stories in different places, but then the legacy of Black, acknowledging Black folks are Indigenous, Black Indigenous people of color, those ways of being that were in harmony with earth, in harmony with water, with other relations, that spans so many thousands of years and time immemorial prior to this blip of colonization that has led us to so much of the pain and trauma that is currently needing to be grieved. And then I want to take us to this section here and just wrap up on the note that I think it's important in my imagery to really visualize people and the dreams and the thriving, and begin to give shape to what that vision looks like and feels like, so that we can actually see it in our mind's eye. And so this poster will be evolving over the course of the day, and I'm so excited to work on it and continue to integrate these amazing, rich stories and offer this drawing back to your group and these speakers. So thank you. All right, thank you so much, everybody. So I just wanted to invite everyone to bring a big round of virtual applause to all of our speakers and our talk coordinator. Oh yeah, we can actually hear our applause. That's great. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. I'm gonna just take a quick screenshot here. So we get a.
Oh, I took it, G.
Oh, beautiful, because we usually get a photo together with the panelists. We can't this year. It's all good. But thank you each so much. I'm sorry we couldn't answer all of the questions in the chat with everybody, but I'm going to start into some housekeeping items. So keynote speakers, thank you so much. TRA will be sharing your work, we'll be sending out your final graphic to everybody later after the conference. Okay. All right, everybody. So now we are getting into the rest of our conference. So I just have a few housekeeping items for everybody, just so that we're all on the same page. A lot of folks have asked about recordings. So just so that everyone's clear, we are recording the sessions throughout the conference, but we may not be able to share all of them due to hosting capacity. We will definitely be posting this keynote though, so that will definitely be available. So please look out for an email after the conference with more information on the recordings. Your Hopin profile. If you haven't yet, please upload a picture to your profile. You can kind of go on the screen. Let's see, where is this? It is on it should be on the right side of your screen. There's a little picture to your profile, and you can actually add also your preferred pronoun to your last name. You can do this by clicking on the profile icon on the far right corner and click My Account, and then click Profile. And you can also add and edit your bio in this way. You might need to refresh your browser after that so that everything can save properly, or reopen a new window, or open Hopin in a new browser. In terms of the chat, you probably have figured this out already, but there's a few levels to the chat. You can chat to the entire event or navigate to the session, and those are the messages that are only viewable in the session. So right now this is auditorium. So whatever session you enter next in the next hour, that'll just be the chat for that session. And then you can also direct message people individually by clicking on their name or searching for them under people, and then just start typing. And you can also even invite them to a video call. So a little bit more on the menu bar that is to your left in the panel there, you see lobby, auditorium, which is where we're at, and all these different buttons. So the sessions button, this will show you the sessions that are upcoming or live at the moment, the rooms that are open. So just imagine these as kind of the classrooms as if we were virtual in person. There's not anything right there right now because we're currently in these remarks. So the first sessions will start at 11:15 a.m. EST. If you are here for certification maintenance credits or CM credits, and you would like to provide feedback in the session, we will have a DivCom assistant at every session who will post the evaluation link into the chat. In terms of networking, again, unfortunately, we can't be in person with all of our hugs because of the pandemic, but there's a networking button where you can be randomly matched with somebody else who has clicked the button. Our DivCom staff will be participating and floating throughout the day, so please definitely take some time to network and meet new folks. We have over 1,000 people registered, and who knows who you're going to meet. You can also just, again, click on somebody's name and send them a private message or invite them into a video call. Then there's the exhibit. So between breaks and during the movement break at 12:30, where we don't have any programming, please feel free to go off screen, eat lunch or breakfast if you're in the West Coast, take your breaks. But if you have time, we encourage you to visit the exhibit space for the virtual marketplace and some really, really cool digital exhibits featuring New York City bathhouses, about prayer, justice in public space, about just transitions in Puerto Rico, and some incredible work of young urban planners from a high school in the Bronx that you don't want to miss. There is a walking tour today at noon. For those of you that have signed up for this social distance walking tour, it begins at noon, so make your way over to Bed-Stuy soon, per the instructions in the confirmation email. For closing remarks, those of you that are staying until the end of today, We ask you to reconvene in this room at around 2:40 EST for some closing remarks and a memorial activity led by Gloria Lau, who is our amazing designer for the programs, the buttons, and the whole space in the platform that you see today. After the conference today, there are 2 programs. At 3 o'clock, there's a healing and safe space hour led by myself and Tiffany. And then at 5:15, there's a trans and gender nonconforming happy hour, but that one's advanced registration only. You can check your program for more information. Don't forget to tag us on social media at DivCom or at DivCommittee with the hashtag Hindsight 2020 or Hindsight Conference with DivCom. I believe Catherine had posted that into the overall chat. Maybe Jose, you can plug this up on the screen. And lastly, since you all see that we are working virtually here and y'all have done this for several months now, there's a lot of things that are out of our control, like the internet. So not everything may go perfectly today. We may have some technical difficulties here and there. So we ask you all to exercise patience and hold each other in care. There is a tech help room. You can come back to this main stage for more information about it, and as well as for some rolling announcements throughout the day. All right, I believe that's all. I hope you all enjoy the conference. Thank you so much, and have a great day. See you around.